Hello, my name is Deb Kielmeyer. I'm a board-certified psychiatrist, and I've decided to make this video breaking down the Johnny versus Amber case that is all over the news right now, and also commenting on the mental health aspects of it. I've decided to do this because I've personally become obsessed with this case in a way that I don't even remember the last time I was so obsessed with some sort of case that was going on in the legal system. And on top of it, I've gotten tons and tons of DMs from friends, including other physicians or other people who, were asking me about some of the mental health aspects of the case or, making their own assessments. And it was so far off base that I was like, I think I need to do some education. So that's the purpose of this. So there's essentially going to be three sections. I'm going to cover the timeline overall of their relationship and the cases. Then I'm going to go into evidence brought up in the cases themselves and also some evidence that is suspected to come up later. And lastly, I will go through some mental health stuff for you. So if you're really familiar with the case and you just want to know more about the mental health stuff, there are timestamps below and you will be able to click to get directly to that. On top of that, if you like this video, I will also let you know some other places you can find me and more content that I produce. And on top of that, if you like this video, please like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and I can make more stuff like this in the future on top of many other things that I'm interested in. So let's begin. So Johnny and Amber's relationship, when did it begin? They first met each other in 2009. They were filming their Rum Diary together and they were playing each other's love interest. Then, but notably at that time, they were both in relationships with other people. So even though they both reported they had a romantic spark, it was not pursued. Fast forward to 2012, Johnny Depp and his long-term partner, Vanessa, and she's also the mother of his two children, they split after I think like 15 years together. And it sounds like pretty immediately after that, him and Amber began dating. And then a couple years later, in 2014, they were engaged. And then they had their private wedding ceremony in 2015. And notably, his daughter Lily did not attend. That was brought up, during the trial, and the reasoning that was expressed by Johnny was that she didn't really like Amber or approve of their relationship. Then 2016, that's when Amber files for divorce after just 15 months of marriage. And at that time, she also obtained a temporary restraining order against him, claimed he abused her while under the influence of drugs and alcohol. So he denied the accusations, and a $7 million settlement occurred that was out of court in August 2016. Amber reported that she donated the money to charity. There's tons of headlines from that time about her donating money to charity, but it's come out since that she never actually donated that money to charity. Fast forward to 2018, that's when Amber wrote the op-ed in the Washington Post. That was actually December 2018. And it was all about her being a domestic abuse victim. She never mentions Johnny Depp by name, but everybody thought it was about Johnny Depp, referencing him. That's when he started getting kicked out of a lot of the movies he'd been on. So it's very easy to assume that's who she was referencing. Notably, around that time, she became a figurehead for the Me Too movement. So fast forward to 2019, Johnny sues Amber for $50 million for defamation over the piece, claiming it cost him work, which we all know it did. And Amber was actually unsuccessful 4 times in her effort to get the lawsuit dismissed. She also has a $100 million counter-suit case that's ongoing at the same time as this. So 2019 was when he filed for the case that's presently in court to occur. Then in 2020, Johnny brought the publisher of The Sun to court for libel in the UK over a 2018 article that claimed he was violent against Amber. So they've already actually been through a whole court trial. The results of that was essentially, it was, thrown out of court, I guess. they found that the paper's claims were true and Johnny didn't win that. So then now this case that was originally brought forward in 2019 actually headed to the courts, taking place in Virginia, and it started April 12th. And I think they gave them about 6 weeks for the trials, what the judge said, so it could take up to 6 weeks. So now I'm gonna start getting into actually breaking down the trial, but I am also think it's important to let you know my own bias in this case. So when I first heard about all this stuff, like when I read or heard about Amber's 2018 piece, I was like, wow, Johnny Depp is an abuser. Okay, that's sad. Like, hope she gets better. But since then, I heard about like I keep up with things on the internet. So I heard that Amber was the only one with an abuse history, that she had, had charges or gotten arrested, I believe, for, assaulting her significant other, just like hitting them, but still, I think in an airport, and I think that was in 2009. Meanwhile, Johnny has no prior history of any, abuse or anything like that. And he actually, in the press since then, multiple of his former partners have come out and talked about how he was a wonderful partner. He was never abusive, and it was very hard for them to believe that he would ever do anything like this. So since then, I evolved and I took the viewpoint that likely Johnny had not done the things that Amber has, accused him of. And that was part of the reason that I had a lot of interest going into this case. Like, okay, we're going to hopefully find out the true story now. So, and a couple of other things, we did note that Amber's career has really prospered. Notably, she plays a big role in Aquaman, and Aquaman 2 is coming out soon. On the other hand, Johnny has been ostracized from Hollywood. He lost his roles in Pirates of the Caribbean and Grimwald. Okay, so now here are the sources that I used to actually learn everything that I did about the trial. So I watched extensive footage on the YouTube channel Law and Crime Network that has live footage of the court case as it's going on. And on top of it, at like the end of the day, they make little videos with like key points that happened that day. So it's really, really great if you just want to see the footage for yourself. But obviously, if you actually want to watch like all the footage, that could take a lot of time because we're many days into it already. So if you just want the highlights of the case, there's 3 Instagram pages I want to shout out that I used, to educate myself on top of looking through stuff spending a lot of time watching stuff on YouTube. So the first is The Talk of Shame. She's on Instagram. Her story highlights go into this very, very well. House and Habit has a very good set of story highlights as well. And lastly, the JD case. They don't have stories, but they just post tons and tons of evidence or other things that are, interesting. And they are certainly biased in Johnny's favor, but I think a lot of the evidence is biased in Johnny's favor, but we'll see what the jury thinks. So in the opening statements, Johnny's lawyer focused on the fact that he's never been accused of abuse in any prior relationship. In fact, his exes tend to only have wonderful things to say about him. And I think this says a lot because as a psychiatrist, I believe that people tend to have patterns. They tend to follow patterns. If someone is abusive, you would expect that they have always been abusive in their prior relationships. It tends to be part of their personality and something that never changes. And then, so thinking about that, we think back to Amber does have a history of being abusive in a relationship. She had the arrest that happened in 2009. So then ultimately they just allege that Amber is an abuser and a liar. Now go to Amber's lawyers. The big thing that came up in their opening statement was they brought up Johnny Depp's friendship with Marilyn Manson, which clearly could put him in a bad light because Marilyn Manson has tons of abuse allegations going on right now. And then one thing that I do want to mention is they made a big show of this makeup palette that Amber supposedly used to cover up her bruises made by Milani Cosmetics. Well, Ms. Milani Cosmetics has since made a TikTok stating that this palette was not released until 2017. So this was clearly a lie, and it was part of their opening statement. Another thing I want to mention is the jury breakdown. So there are 8 men and 3 women. Ultimately, I think only 7 of them get to vote. And I heard the reason for more men than women was they felt that women would be biased towards Johnny. Don't blame them. Okay, so then let's get to the people who were, polled to give testimony for this. So the first is Johnny's sister / his personal manager. Her name is Christy. She testified, the big points are that, their mother was very abusive, but Johnny never hit back. He seemed very sad throughout his relationship with Amber, and that she would book an extra room for Johnny when he and Amber traveled together so that he would have somewhere to hide when they fought. And she also reported that Johnny wanted a prenup to protect his kids, but Amber refused. Next, the next individual on the stand was Johnny's friend Isaac. Now, this is also a friend of Amber, but I think originally really Johnny's friend. And as far as I know, it's like, going off my memory. But I believe that I read that he's one of Johnny's really close friends that Johnny paid for his rent for him to live in the same apartment building as them. But please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's from my memory. So he took the stand and he made it clear that he believes Amber's story is a lie. And one notable thing he stated was that he saw Elon Musk at their building twice. This is important due to the suspicion that Johnny's team will bring up later, which is accusations that Amber was cheating on Johnny with Elon while she was still married to Johnny and hadn't filed for divorce yet. Okay, so then the next person on the stand was Amber's former personal assistant, Kate. And this Kate, the personal assistant, said that Amber was very abusive to her and others in her life. And she never saw any evidence that Johnny abused Amber. Okay. So next notable person on the stand was their couples therapist, Johnny and Amber's, Dr. Anderson. She notably said that she thought that there was mutual abuse in the relationship, but she did state that Amber did admit to physical abuse of Johnny to her. And in their sessions, Amber really dominated and Johnny sort of shut down. So, probably one of the only other notable people so far was Sean, which is Johnny's security guard. He said that Amber and her family and friends all took advantage of Johnny. He never saw marks on Amber, and he took photos of wounds on Johnny from Amber. So next, we have Johnny taking the stand. Here are the things that stand out from that. So he shares that in April 2016, he found that his financial people found that a lot of money was missing from his accounts. His suspicion, or their suspicion, was that something criminal occurred. No suggestion that it was related to Amber. This is just so you know what he was going through in that time of his life. So the night that he found this out, they had a fight. And the next day, the infamous poop incident occurred. This is, if you know something about this trial, what you do know is the poop incident, because it's getting blowing up in memes, and it's obviously very bizarre, odd, gross. So of course it's going to stand out to people. So he reports the night after they had this fight, they had a fight that night, and then the next day he wanted to go to their place because she was going to be at Coachella or something, to retrieve some of his stuff because he planned on leaving her. He planned on filing for divorce. And his security guard, I believe it was Sean, the same one we mentioned earlier, he showed him a photo of fecal matter on his side of the bed. And if you haven't seen this photo, you have to look it up. Essentially, Amber ends up saying that their tiny little dogs are responsible for this fecal matter on his side of the bed. But we've all seen the photo, and it makes the most sense that what Johnny's saying is more believable, that this is human fecal matter. And obviously the general assumption is that Amber was responsible, that, to put it bluntly, that she shit on his side of the bed because she was mad at him, which is obviously very, very weird. Most people don't do that when they fight. Okay, so this obviously was like a huge fight. He was going through some shit. They didn't see each other again until May 2016, which is the day after his mom died. He was apparently planning to file for divorce. And this day stands out because what's going around, if you're following his trial, is the footage from that day, because Amber did record footage on her phone that day of like a fight they had. And to me, what I saw when I watched that video was it seemed that she was provoking him when he was in a really low place. Like, you know, he's dealing with people having stole tons of money from him. They're probably going to get a divorce. And now his mom just died the day before. And so one thing that I did read was that he really had, like, his mom dying was somehow the trigger for him. And he had decided that he was going to file for divorce. So 5 days after this, or maybe not 5 days, but a few days after this, Amber was the one who actually filed for divorce. And one other thing I want to note from the time Johnny was on the stand is we heard so much random audio. Some of the audio is Amber admitting to punching him, or actually, she didn't admit to punching him. He said in the audio that she punched him, but she was like, no, I just hit you. But I will say this is the only time we have either of them admitting to physical abuse, and it was her. So another thing that was also a really big part of Johnny's time on stand, which is still going on right now, is his substance use. So he was very open about, you know, liking substances. He's very open that he drinks alcohol, but that his substance of choice is cannabis. The one, you know, substance, and he also talks about cocaine use as well. But when he was with Amber, he actually was addicted to opiates and sought treatment. So from the way he described this period of time, like getting sober from opiates, it seems like it was a horrible time for him and he didn't feel supported by Amber. One thing that didn't make sense to me as a psychiatrist is, you know, he talked a lot about how there was a seizure risk if he, you know, wasn't getting appropriate treatment for his opiate withdrawal. Now, in general, if he really was just on opiates, there is no seizure possibility when someone's withdrawing from opiates. People can have seizures from alcohol withdrawal or benzodiazepine withdrawal, but opiate withdrawal, although terrible, is not something that is really deadly or dangerous in any way. It's all, you know, just miserable symptoms, but nothing that's going to kill you. So I don't know if either Johnny is confused or if he was on something else that he didn't mention, that he was also getting treatment for, that he could have had seizures from. Considering how open he is with his substances, I imagine that he is confused. Maybe someone gave him false information. And the reality is, outside of psychiatrists or physicians, I think most people don't really understand maybe the risk of, you know, different withdrawals, and they might actually think that. So that's very possible as well. Other audio that we heard, her saying she's more famous than Johnny. You know, they did include had Johnny read a lot of text messages to others, where he would wish negative things would happen to her, including that she would drown and other things that really sound terrible when someone's reading the text messages. So this was a huge focus of Amber's lawyer. Personally, I didn't think much of it. I think many of us say horrible things in text message, but aren't violent people. On top of it, we don't know the context. There is a chance that some of these situations really could have just been a complete joke, like dark humor. So, you know, it's hard to really fully understand that. Another thing that stood out to me while watching this whole trial was Amber has a complete like flat affect. Nothing going on, except for occasionally her attorney would like say something to her, and for a second she'd like have a smile or giggle, and then the mask would come back on. It's really what it seemed like. It did seem like a mask. Occasionally, it also seemed like she was, for lack of a better way to say this, trying to look upset during certain parts of the trial when certain things were brought up. So, that's just my opinion. And I will say this again, but obviously, this is my personal opinion, not making any psychiatric consensus about anything. Just observations and thoughts to help you make your own conclusions. So let's recap all of this. So essentially, there is no hard evidence that Amber was ever abused. And there are witnesses as well as evidence that support that Johnny was abused. And I didn't make a note of it, but Amber does have numerous photos of the alleged abuse from Johnny, like bruises, stuff like that. But there were numerous witnesses who stated that they did not see bruises on her at the time these incidents supposedly occurred. We also need to note that yes, Johnny does abuse substances, but Amber also abuses them as well. And that did come up during the trial. He stated that, and other people stated that as well. And one thing I seem to have noticed, and seems to be pretty visible right now, is that Amber was really unable to find anyone to support her allegations. The witnesses tend to either side with Johnny's side of things, or they're neutral and say that they had a mutually abusive relationship, like their psychologist said. So now to discuss mental health. So before I get to this, I want to mention the Goldwater rule. This is something that the American Psychiatric Association came out with. It's sort of like one of their ethical statements, and they say that essentially it states that psychiatrists have a responsibility to participate in activities contributing to the improvement of the community, the betterment of public health, but they should not give a professional opinion about public figures whom they have not examined in person and whom they have not obtained consent to discuss their mental health in public statements. So this all occurred because in 1964, there was a presidential nominee named Barry Goldwater, and they polled psychiatrists about him and whether he was fit to be president. And that's when he sued the magazine. This whole case happened, and then the APA made this Goldwater rule, which is not a law, by the way. It's an ethical recommendation. But, and I will say that since then, during Trump's presidency, many psychiatrists spoke out about Trump's mental health, saying that he has narcissistic personality disorder, tons and tons and tons. So a lot of psychiatrists don't actually agree that they should refrain from speaking out when it is something like a president where it can impact, a whole planet negatively, essentially. Maybe just don't speak out when it's someone not so prominent where things don't matter as much. So my thoughts are, I do believe that we should be cautious in publicly vocalizing, and by we I mean psychiatrists, in publicly vocalizing our assessments of those we haven't met. But I'm happy to discuss thoughts about things like here or there, for example, when I shared earlier that I believe that, and this is a commonly believed thing, that if people are abusers, they have a history of abuse. It's just not something that randomly is here or there or develops when someone's really late in life. That tends to be a personality trait that's, sort of something that just stays the same, essentially. So I think it's important to discuss stuff and discuss mental health in general, diagnoses and stuff like this, and even within the context of certain things to help people really think about it, just because our society is really poorly informed about mental health. And right now, this really becomes clear when you go on TikTok and people are essentially like making up disorders or twisting disorders, and everybody has a disorder and everything is pathological. So I think it's really important for psychiatrists to try to educate the public about mental health and try to do it in an appropriate manner, but also to do it in ways that are exciting and obtaining people's interest. That being said, I am not going to make any comments about, mental health disorders specifically for Amber or Johnny right now. I'm just going to try to take you through maybe some very obvious things that they've admitted to themselves, and then just sort of give you some more information so that you can determine for yourself what you think is going on. So that being said, a huge reason why I wanted to make this video is I got so many direct messages, DMs from people saying, physicians, not psychiatrists, saying, don't you think Amber has borderline personality disorder? So I will actually, answer why I can't answer that when I get through this. But the first thing I want to say is one thing they do admit to is abusing substances. And essentially whenever someone uses a substance frequently, like every day or something like that, by the DSM criteria, they do meet criteria for that substance use disorder. But I'd be hesitant to say that either of them has any substance use disorder besides Johnny, being open about the opiate use disorder in the past that he got treatment for. So I think that's one thing we can say for sure. I mean, he clearly got treated for it. He was open about that. So we're just going based off what he said. He had opiate use disorder and is now in sustained remission. So the one thing that I wanted to go through is personality disorders, just so everyone can understand a little more. So I'm going to go through like the criteria, and then I'm going to go through some of my thought processes for this in general, and then you can do with it what you will. So one person told me, do you think that Amber has histrionic personality disorder? So let me go through that and then explain why I don't really care whether someone has this personality disorder or not. And in psychiatry, we don't really care. So the definition in the DSM is that histrionic personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of excessive emotionality and attention seeking, beginning by early adulthood and presenting in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. And they give 8 things. So to meet criteria, someone has to have 5 or more of these. First one, they are uncomfortable in situations in which he or she is not the center of attention. 2, interaction with others is often characterized by inappropriate sexuality, seductive or provocative behavior. 3, displays rapidly shifting and shallow expression of emotions. 4, consistently uses physical appearance to draw attention to self. 5, has a style of speech that is excessively impressionistic and lacking in detail. 6, shows self-dramatization, theatricality, and exaggerated expression of emotion. 7, is suggestible, i.e., easily influenced by others or circumstances. And then 8, considers relationships to be more intimate than they actually are. So I can't say, and neither can any of you, whether Amber or even Johnny has histrionic personality disorder, but I'll tell you why it doesn't matter. Histrionic personality disorder doesn't make you require mental health care, nor does it cause you to have behavior that results in criminal activities. So I have never diagnosed a single patient with histrionic personality disorder because it's just not important. That's not the reason someone's going to come see me. And even if it's part of what's going on with them, it's not something we treat. It's just really not important. And it certainly isn't linked to like abusive behavior or criminal behavior or something like that. So the reality is all of us know people who are histrionic. And on top of it, just because someone's histrionic doesn't necessarily mean anything negative about them. Like, I mean, of course, there's some negative connotations with those things. But for example, you could be histrionic and be an actor or an actress, or you're really big on TikTok because you use that to be a positive for you. So at the end of the day, these diagnoses don't really tell you anything you don't know in most cases, and they're just a label to make things easy. So next is borderline personality disorder. And this one is very helpful diagnostically, and here's why. It is the one treatable personality disorder. The treatment for borderline personality disorder is something called DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, and studies show that when someone diagnosed as BPD, or borderline personality disorder, does DBT for a year, 60% of them will experience complete remission of their symptoms. So let's go through their criteria. So BPD, their criteria: a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects, so like emotions and how you express that, and marked impulsivity, beginning by early adulthood and presenting in a variety of contexts as indicated by 5 or more of the following. And there are 9 criteria, so someone would have to have 5 or more of these. The first is frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. So, this is going to be most obvious with someone afraid of like their partner leaving them, and maybe behaviors to try to keep their partner to stay with them that actually pushes them away. 2, a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterizing by extremes of idealization and devaluation. So the way to think about this is just, someone who has a hard time maintaining long-term secure relationships, whether it's romantic or friends, okay? 3, identity disturbance, markedly and persistent unstable self-image or sense of self. So this is just someone who says, I don't really know who I am. Maybe one way it can actually present that's pretty common is someone questioning like gender identity, sexual orientation, all these different things, aspects of themselves, feeling like they don't really know who they are, that maybe they don't have any consistent interest. Next one, number 4, impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. Examples: spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. So this one often gets mistaken for like bipolar disorder, but it's criteria for borderline personality disorder. And it's something to certainly think about because that results in a lot of misdiagnosis. Number 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. So you can think of it as someone who self-harms or someone who's chronically suicidal. 6, and this one is actually the criteria that is most, it's like the one that if someone has this, it's most likely that they actually have BPD of all the criteria. So it is affective instability. So what this means is intense episodic dysphoria, irritability or anxiety, lasting a few hours and only really more than a few days. So that just means mood swings, frequent mood swings. So that's the biggest thing that of all these criteria that's indicative of BPD. 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. 8, inappropriate intense anger or difficulty controlling anger, including frequent displays of temper, constant anger, recurrent physical bites. 9, transient stress-related paranoid ideations or severe dissociative symptoms. So something to think about this is, sometimes, like as a psychiatrist, I have enough history to very strongly suspect that someone has BPD. But some of this is based upon someone's subjective self-report, right? So when I think someone has BPD, what I actually do is I go through their criteria with them and I ask them if they think they have it. Sometimes, they'll say no to something, but there's evidence that the answer should actually be yes. Like, I'll get to the suicidal one and they'll say no, but they've had multiple suicide attempts. So I'm like, I think you're maybe lacking a little bit of insight into that, and the answer is actually yes. And then if we count them up and it's 5 or more, they meet their criteria. I've never gone through this list with someone that I suspected that they had it and not hit the 5. And then we talked about the diagnosis, the treatment, that medications aren't very likely to help them. And this is something that there's a special type of therapy called CBT that's really good for it. So that being said, unless someone tells you, like a public figure announces they have BPD, you might suspect they have it, but you definitely can't really know because a lot of this stuff is subjective self-report. Another thing I'd like to note is that BPD gets a really bad rep. People tend to associate it with being a bad person, like an abuser. But the reality is that if someone has BPD and doesn't have like coexisting narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, they're often just a really sweet person who's suffering and wants to feel better, but doesn't know what's going on or how to feel better. So, something to think about. Next, I'm going to hit on NPD. So, narcissistic personality disorder. A pervasive pattern of grandiosity and fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and presenting in a variety of contexts as indicated by 5 or more of the following. The first one, has a grandiose sense of self-importance. Example, exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without achievements. The next one, they're preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Third, believes he or she is special and unique, and they can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high-status people or institutions. 4, requires excessive admiration. 5, has a sense of entitlement. Example, unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment for automatic compliance with his or her expectations. Next is interpersonally exploitive, so takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends. Then lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Next, they are often envious of others or believe that others are envious of them. And lastly, they show arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. So, as a psychiatrist, I rarely diagnose this because people with narcissistic personality disorder don't think they need help. They don't think that there's anything wrong with them, and they certainly don't need the help of a psychiatrist. And the reality is, even if I have patients, which has happened, which do have narcissistic personality disorder, it's not going to help them to give them that diagnosis. It's not going to do anything. There's really no treatment for it. The reality is that a lot of us have narcissistic traits like when we're toddlers, right? But we grow out of them as we get older and we realize we're not the center of the world. Generally, it's something that's pretty stable once someone is in adulthood and meets full criteria. We all have traits of personality disorders. So if you hear a few things here or there while I'm going through these and it describes you, that's okay. It's something to be aware of and work on to get better about. But it doesn't mean that, you have a personality disorder just because you have traits of them. That's why you have to meet a certain number before you meet criteria to actually have a personality disorder. So, however, we often can look at this list, think about someone in our life, and think, yeah, I think that person's a narcissist. And you might be right. So, some of them are technically subjective, but they are things that we can also usually observe. I mean, all of these, there's a way it's going to be exhibited in someone's behavior. There are things that are going to happen and we can sort of know, this person either has very strong narcissistic traits or has narcissistic personality disorder. And it can be very helpful. For example, just putting it out there, if you were in a situation where you had an abusive relationship, and part of looking back on that and recovering from it and getting help is being able to label that person as a narcissist, and then getting more information on narcissists and what it's like to be someone who, survived a relationship with them. Or, for example, many people had like a parent with narcissism, and it's very, very helpful for them to read about it and learn. So that's more so where this diagnosis can be helpful. I would say psychiatrists don't use it that much. The person who has it is certainly not going to care. But for people who have been victims of narcissists, it can be like, wow, like reading this and reading more things and their understanding and their healing and all of that. So, clearly some of the criteria insinuates that a narcissist could be abusive to people in their life. So something that's interesting is like, we're going to get to antisocial personality disorder, which I would say the layperson term for that is sociopathy or psychopathy. So a psychopath or a sociopath. But essentially, narcissism and antisocial personality disorder are sort of like a spectrum. Like, usually if someone is highly narcissistic, they are also going to be somewhere on the antisocial personality disorder spectrum. And if someone is on the antisocial personality disorder spectrum, they're very likely to be on the narcissistic personality disorder spectrum somewhere. So they're not like totally separate. And there are studies that have looked at this. So starting with antisocial personality disorder, it is a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring since age 15 years, as indicated by 3 or more of the following. 1. Failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. 2. Deceitfulness as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. 3. Impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. 4. Irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. 5. Reckless disregard for safety of self or others. 6. Consistent irresponsibility as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. 7. Lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent or 2. Or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from one another. Some other criteria: the individual is at least 18 years old. There has to have been evidence that they also had some of these types of behaviors when they were younger than 15. And the occurrence of these behaviors is not exclusively during a psychotic episode or a manic episode. So it has to be separate from that, because obviously that would be a different underlying reason. So, objectively, we can say that Johnny would probably state that Amber has at least aspects of narcissism and antisocial, and Amber would probably say that about Johnny, right? Because if we go through these criteria, it's lots of things that each of them is accusing the other of doing. However, it's up to you to, number 1, decide who you believe, and number 2, decide, what makes sense believing the things that you do believe. But I hope that I've made it clear that, histrionic personality disorder doesn't matter, and BPD is not something either of them are, accusing the other person of when you look at those criteria. And it's highly, highly subjective stuff. I hope I can convince people that, if you believe that Amber is an abuser and she did all the things that Johnny is accusing her of doing, that your mind shouldn't go straight to borderline personality disorder, that those people who suffer with borderline personality disorder are not abusers, and they are people who are suffering and just need help. So I hope this was helpful. I'm super excited to continue to follow the trial. Might make another video, might not, depends how you guys feel and what you want. But let me know your thoughts, and I hope this was helpful.